mediums, dark sorcerers, and a trip through the 9 circles of hell. We've got it all in our review of Worms Crawl Out from Dan Schmidt, available now on Kickstarter. See you in 3. And welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Worms Crawl Out by Dan Schmidt. And in this follow-up graphic novel to the original graphic novel, Worms Crawl In, Delane takes a trip through the many circles of hell to save Marco from a fate worse than death. But before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. Your attention is greatly appreciated. And make sure to stay tuned through the end for the score. Let's talk about the credits before we dig into the meat of the story. Worms Crawl Out is written by Dan Schmidt, also with the story collaboration with Matthew Waterman. Art, colors, not colors, it's black and white. Letters and cover art all done also by Dan Schmidt. To recap what happened in the previous graphic novel before we get into this one, it's a bit of a long story, but it's a good one. We reviewed it positively. Worms Crawl In is a story of Delane, who's a troubled woman who also happens to be a medium. She can speak to the dead. She can see souls. She can do all the spiritual things you can imagine. And through the course of her story, she essentially enters into a friendship or a partnership with Marco, who is a soul trapped in a corpse's body, effectively a zombie, if you will, but he doesn't get around so well. And so the two of them spend their powers and their circumstances freeing trapped souls in an assortment of haunted places. Their travels eventually lead to or essentially cross paths with a not so nice person by the name of Rohan, and that creates a bit of violence and a bit of conflict. And in the course of that conflict, Rohan is killed, but Marco is destroyed as well. It's hard to say he's killed because effectively he's already dead, but he's destroyed, the body's destroyed, and Marco's soul is banished or damned if you so choose. And Delane, or Delaney, is left by herself to kind of figure out what is her path in life. How can she go on when her partner of so many years is no longer with us? And she's used to kind of carrying him around in the trunks of cars and doing all kinds of things together. And now she's effectively alone to sulk and be very emo-ish as she journals her pain and existential angst away, still imbued with the power to talk to the dead and see the dead for what they are and where they're trapped. Worms Crawl Out is the follow-up to that one. In this case, she reaches out to Parker and Jordan, who are paranormal researchers, more than amateur. They have some experience in this field. And Delane is really feeling the weight and the grief of losing Marco, recognizing that he did so much to help her in her quest and journey of freeing trapped souls, and now potentially he has been damned when she promised to protect him and keep him from harm. And so she sets out on a quest with Parker and Jordan's help to find some way to get through to the afterlife, to find Marco, to hopefully help his soul either move on or bring him back, one way or the other, but not allow him to be trapped in whatever hell he finds himself in. Marco has some experience with research when it comes to things like ley lines and vortexes and finding out where spiritual convergences occur. He and Jordan gather their gear. They take Delane to a nearby location where the Earth's ley lines coincide, and where they also have rumors that nearby where these ley line convergences happen to occur there is a tribe, maybe tribe is the wrong word, a group or family of albino cannibal killers, if you will. Now, they don't find albino cannibal killers, but when they get to the area where the ley lines intersect, Delane does meet somebody named Amokie, who happens to be albino, who also happens to have the same kind of powers to see and converse and interact with the dead as she does. But Amokie, either through tribal what would you call it, generational knowledge, passing down of training and what have you, is able to navigate the limbo of the afterlife much more readily and knows much more about the afterlife than Delane does. And so Delane reaches out to Amokie in the spiritual plane as an astral projection. Amokie says, I know what you're trying to do. It's a noble cause. I'm going to help you. I know where Marco is. Marco is at the 9th circle of hell, and he's trapped there. And what follows is something much bigger than anybody would have expected. Amokie takes Delane through the 9 circles of hell, where Delane gets a closer view of all the damned, where they're residing, why they're residing, and the tortures they must endure when they get there. But here's the twist. Hell is not the hell that you might think of, fire and brimstone, in the same sense of people just being damned for punishment. Hell is now a construct or a manifestation of our own pain and suffering that we will in through ourselves without allowing ourselves to pass on. In other words, we create the hell that we endure, is how Dan Schmidt is presenting it here. And that's an interesting novel concept. So what happens is the Delane goes through the 9 circles of hell with Amokie's guidance, and they encounter this assortment of characters, some of which appeared in the previous graphic novel, that are experiencing their own forms of torture because they are effectively choosing to hold on to their pain or their regret or whatever sadness or discomfort that they chose to take with them after death, instead of letting it go, forgiving yourself and being at peace with who you are so that you can move on. So then in that way, hell essentially becomes a form of masochism, if you want to call it that. And eventually Amokie and Delane get to that 9th circle of hell, where they find Marco. And Marco is standing as one of the massive guardians to that 9th circle. And Marco is basically said, I'm here because I'm not ready to move on, and I deserve to be here for a while, and I will move on when I'm ready. Right now, I have to serve my time and free myself from the pain that I've caused and on other people and myself. And it becomes a very strangely bittersweet and emotionally deep journey that Delane goes on, and one that where she encounters the people that she's touched along the way. Now, while all of that is happening and a trip through hell is in process, Parker and Jordan are standing watch over Delane's body, and they encounter somebody named, oh, this is going to be a tough one to pronounce. I'm going to try. It's going to be a tough one. Chirurgion Slurpee, who was apparently some sort of dark wizard that Parker met in his younger years as a up-and-coming paranormal researcher. And Slurpee became the leader of this cult obsessed with immortality. And in the course of that process, Slurpee eventually found the path or the way to become immortal, but not in the way he thinks. The way he becomes immortal is essentially he gets consumed and imbued with the worms and the parasites and the creatures of the earth that infest and eventually consumed and eventually reconstituted his entire body. So now his body, which looks like him, is really a mass of worms, hence the name Worms Crawl Out, that still has this consciousness in it. So he's able to be punched and hit and smacked, and he gloops apart, but he comes back together again because he's composed of nothing but worms. It's gross, it's disgusting, and it's super effective. But what happens, Parker and Jordan manage to find a way to overcome Slurpee, while Delane and Amokie make their peace with Marco, and they all decide to move on before they come back together in the physical plane. Parker and Jordan just manage, at least temporarily, destroy Slurpee, and then Delane is now sort of not necessarily at peace with Marco for what he's done and what he sacrificed and where he currently is, but at least understanding and accepting of his friend's choices. And then that moves the story forward into whatever comes next. Sounds like a lot. It is a big graphic novel, about 80 some odd pages. So you definitely get your money's worth with the suggested cover price from the Kickstarter at about $20. You definitely get plenty of stories worth here, and a lot happens. There's a lot of meat on this bone. What do we like about Worms Crawl Out? Just in general, I think the whole concept of Delane putting herself through a journey through hell, very similar to some of the stories you might read in the same vein from classic literature, is impressive in its thoughtfulness. Dan Schmidt put a lot of care and attention to understanding the different levels of hell, or at least creating different aspects or different versions of each of the levels, and putting characters in their places to reflect the pain and suffering that they've experienced and chosen to take with them after they've died. So this is a surprisingly mature kind of depiction of hell, rather than just a very tried and true stereotypical form of fire and brimstone. And once you get into it, it's like, wow, there's a lot of layers here, and there's a lot of potentially emotionally deep things to chew on here. And Delane gets a first row seat as she makes her way through one level to the next. And it's surprisingly mature, surprisingly complex. And then once you get to the ending with her final meeting with Marco, where they part ways, it's very bittersweet and again impressive in the amount of emotional maturity and depth that is displayed in that final goodbye. What didn't we like about the Worms Crawl Out? What didn't we like about Worms Crawl Out? And as far as how the story started, progressed, and finished, the whole concept of Parker with this dark wizard named Slurpee seems just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's not necessarily bad, but it feels like you have two different stories going on that don't really relate to each other in any way. So there's a weird lack of cohesion between those two plots. Obviously, Delane's journey she's the main protagonist of this entire series. So obviously her journey is the main plot. But Parker with this dark wizard that is composed of worms, although it's very interesting and it's very effective and it's just very weird from a horror standpoint, it's good in and of itself, but it's really not tied to anything that Delane is doing. And so there's a disconnect there. The two don't mesh necessarily, other than that they happen to take place with the same characters at the same time. It just feels like two things that come out that are not connected, but happening in the same space. And there's a sort of a disconnect there. That's a little bit odd. It's not terrible. It's not necessarily, that's not even bad, but it just, there's like, well, why is this one story happening over here and this other story happening over here? And is it just to fill space? I don't know. Possibly, who knows? But that disconnect is probably the only really down point of this issue or this graphic novel. How about the art? The art is excellent. Dan Schmidt gives you, distinctive characters, so you understand who's who and what's what. There's no cheaping out on the art in this story. It's black and white, but everything looks great. The depictions of hell are very creative, very imaginative, especially for each particular level. And the range of emotional experiences that Delane goes through is projected loud and clear, which is what you want, because this is a painful experience for her, and you feel it every step of the way. So thumbs up to Dan Schmidt on the art. Final thoughts. What do we think about Worms Crawl Out from Dan Schmidt? Very interesting concept. Very complex, mature, emotional writing going on there from the experience of the point of view of the protagonist. And the overall read for a 85 plus page graphic novel is very well paced, very well structured. On the downside, the thing that didn't quite land is the connection between Delane's journey through hell and the reappearance of the reconstituted body made of worms for a dark wizard. The two stories just don't seem to cohesively mesh, and that's okay. That's not necessarily a big deal, but it just seems like it sticks out, and they don't really come together in a way that makes sense. So overall, we're going to give Worms Crawl Out from Dan Schmidt a solid 8.5 out of 10. And a majority of that is due to the Delane's journey through hell. We hope you enjoyed this review. We want to know what are your thoughts. Do you like emotionally deep, rich, complex storytelling, even if it is weird horror? Or do you like your horror a little bit more shocking and in your face? Want to know in the comments down below. Let us know. Otherwise, for more reviews just like this one, please stay tuned through the outro.